Michael Madison. The first story is about Michael Madison, who had been accused of multiple accounts of aggravated murders and kidnappings.
I am struck by the sheer inhumanity of what one human being can do to not one, but 3 human beings.
He is known to have committed the murders of 3 women over a 9-month period in 2012 and 2013. He had kept their bodies wrapped in garbage bags in his house, which were later discovered by the police, and Madison was taken into custody.
He went on to abuse the corpses of these 3 victims.
One of the victims was Sherelda Terry, whose father gave a victim impact statement in the courtroom during his trial. When Terry's father came in the courtroom to give his statement, he looked at Michael, and Michael smiled at him maliciously. Sherelda's father ran towards him and threw himself at him to attack him. Throughout his trial, Michael did not show any remorse at all. He did not make any statements. During his interrogation, he stated that he had a horrific and chaotic childhood. His mother had severely abused him as a child, which eventually led him to indulge in drugs and alcohol to cope with anger and resentment.
Accordingly, the sentence of death is imposed upon the defendant Michael Madison on counts 1, 4, and 7.
He was sentenced to death, as lifetime imprisonment was not enough of a punishment for such a horrific, brutal act. He was given the death penalty, which was the only option for criminals like him. Esteban Carpio. The next story is about Esteban Carpio, who is an American convicted prison inmate and has been serving a life sentence for the murder of a policeman in 2005.
Every day, I face the facts of what I did and what happened.
On April 16, 2005, the Providence police were questioning Esteban Carpio at headquarters as he was accused of being involved in the stabbing of an 84-year-old lady. During his investigation, there were 2 police officers in the room. One of them left to get water for Carpio, leaving him and Detective Sergeant James L. Allen in the room. Carpio took hold of Detective Allen's gun and shot him twice, killing him. He then escaped through the window but was arrested 45 minutes later after a struggle. During his first court appearance, he was wearing a plastic mask as he was bruised badly and his face was all swollen up because of the jump from the 3rd-story building.
Police brutality! He was mentally ill and he needed help and we couldn't get it. We tried and tried.
His family members accused the police officers of treating him brutally, although an investigation confirmed later that Carpio's injuries were sustained as a result of his jump and struggle with the law enforcement. Carpio, who did not take the stand, argued through his lead attorney Sheketov that he was in the throes of a psychosis. He was unable to control his behavior and did not realize the wrongfulness of his actions. The prosecution depicted Carpio as a cunning police hater who was manipulative enough to exaggerate his mental condition in interviews with investigators and medical personnel. However, in the end, the jury rejected Carpio's claim of innocence by reason of insanity and found him guilty of premeditated murder. He was sentenced to lifetime imprisonment. Ashley McArthur. Ashley McArthur served as a crime scene technician and was best friends with the murder victim, Taylor Wright.
We, the jury, find the defendant, Ashley McArthur, guilty of first-degree premeditated murder with a firearm as charged in the indictment.
She was a 33-year-old private investigator and a former police officer. Taylor was going through a divorce and withdrew $100,000 from a joint account between her and her husband, Jeff Wright. She then gave McArthur more than $30,000 to safeguard on her behalf. On September 8, 2017, Taylor went missing. McArthur said that both the victim and she had gone to her family's property to ride horses. After that, they had come back, and Taylor probably went to a bar. But the phone calls pointed to the opposite of the statement provided by McArthur. So the police followed up on this lead and found Taylor's body in another farm owned by McArthur's family. She had been shot in the back of her head and then concealed under potted soil. McArthur's bank account also portrayed that the money had been deposited in her account. Prosecutors claimed that when Taylor confronted McArthur about the money, it was the last time the victim was heard. The prosecutor, Bridget Johnson, pointed out that McArthur displayed 2 different behaviors during the investigation sessions.
Do you have any ideas, anyone that we can go talk to?
I don't know, we've already talked
At first, she was acting all flirtatious with the police officers and also playful with law enforcement. In the second interview, she knew that she had been caught and her demeanor was completely different then. Dante Wright. The next story for today is about Dante Wright, a 17-year-old student who was involved in the murdering of an 18-year-old boy, Jordan Michael Clee, in the cruelest way.
And did you kill him with that shot?
Yes.
Jordan Clee was the only child of his family. He was a great student and a source of pride and joy to his mother. It was his final year in high school, and he was super excited about attending university the next year. On October 14th, 2016, a maintenance worker at the complex heard some gunshots. When he went to check, he saw Jordan lying on the path with a single gunshot wound to his head. He was robbed and then brutally murdered by 3 teenagers, Dante Wright, Delreno Gracie, and Jarmarius Ellison.
I just want to tell y'all, I'll be home soon. R.I.P. Keon, I love my family.
Of these 3, Dante Wright made the headlines because of his incredibly shocking behavior throughout his trial. When Dante Wright appeared before the judge for his pre-trial hearing in court, he decided that it was the perfect time to confess everything. He told the judge how he and his friends gunned down Jordan while trying to rob him. His voice was so calm while he was answering the questions of the prosecutor, as if it was no big deal at all. He smiled and laughed, and when he got up to speak, he did not express any remorse at all.
I just want to tell y'all, I'll be home soon.
Instead, casually saying that he would be out of there soon. Dante had already made a plea deal with the prosecutor to accept the charges of second-degree homicide and armed robbery in exchange for a shorter sentence of 23 to 50 years instead of lifetime imprisonment. After his cold behavior in court, his plea deal was to be rejected, but then Jordan's family wanted everything to be over with and wanted closure from this case. In the end, Dante was sentenced to 23 to 50 years imprisonment for a second-degree homicide and armed robbery. Chris Watts. This story shocked the whole world. Chris Watts was a seemingly loving dad and a doting husband. His wife Shannon was very active on social media and used to share her everyday life with her friends and followers. Everyone who followed her thought Shannon and her husband were the perfect couple. But the reality was quite different. In the beginning, Shannon and her husband had a really good marriage, but slowly she started feeling that her husband was pulling away from her. When Shannon was pregnant with her 3rd child, a son who she had already named, she was woken up by Chris one morning. Chris wanted to talk to her about the future of their marriage. Chris admitted that he had been having an affair behind Shannon's back. The woman he was having an affair with thought that Chris was close to finalizing his divorce with Shannon. Chris had been lying to his mistress as well. Hearing this, Shannon got very emotional and said that she would never let Chris see his daughters again. Upon hearing this, Chris strangled his wife. His 4-year-old daughter Bella came and asked her dad what was wrong with mom. Chris wrapped Shannon's body in a blanket and put the 2 girls in the backseat of the car and drove to his work site. Chris was an oil operator at Anadarko Petroleum. What he did next easily puts him at the top of our list for today's video. He smothered Bella and Celeste, suffocated them, and then put them in oil tanks, his very own flesh and blood. Chris buried his wife's body in a nearby field. After this brutal act, he went about his day. It was only after Shannon's friend couldn't get any response from her after calling her a number of times that she went over and called Chris. Chris came back and acted innocent and pretended to be clueless about Shannon's whereabouts.
All the girls' blankies are gone. Their blankies they sleep with, they don't leave anywhere without them.
Good.
But Chris couldn't hold up his act for long, as he soon failed a polygraph test and had no option but to confess to this dreadful act.
Words that come to mind when I hear the evidence in this case are the senseless crime and the viciousness of the crime.
He was then put through a harsh interrogation where Chris cried and pleaded.
So the court is going to sentence Mr. Watts as follows.
Chris is now charged with 3 counts of first-degree murders. He also faces another count for the unlawful termination of a pregnancy and 3 more counts of tampering with a body. Inmates in the prison say that he is an outcast, even in the prison. They further added that he's probably the most hated man in that prison because he killed children. Not only did Chris get a harsh sentence, but he is also loathed by criminals who themselves have committed evil crimes. How pathetic. Brutal killings are one of the most vindictive crimes a person can commit. How can someone get carried away with such a heinous act and feel not the least bit remorseful? Committing this cruel and sinful act is one thing, and not feeling the least bit guilty about it is another. Which of these stories shocked you the most? Which killer do you think deserved a harsher punishment? Let the conversation continue in the comments below, and don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel to stay informed with similar bone-chilling stories.